talking about pagers, even though we are now in the world of virtual communication, Nick Fury and Captain Marvel still communicate on pagers. A very good evening to all of you, and here we are with another session of Ask Me Anything. Today we have Mr. Kaustubh Patekar here with us from ProdGen. And today we are going to discuss about the current trends in product management. Welcome, Kaustubh here. I have myself and Amit, and we are going to grill you for some, good insights on product management for our viewers.
Thank you, Shweta. Thank you for having me on this session. And I'm looking forward, not to the grilling, but sharing.
Yeah. Oh, yes, of course. I'm sure you'll enjoy it. So just for the benefit of all the audience here, Amit and I would like you to introduce, give a little introduction about you and your company, and then we move ahead.
Okay, sure. Thanks. So I think I've spent a very, very long time building products. I think I started building products in 1998. That was my first job out of college. I studied engineering, aerospace engineering. And then I jumped to software. So from 98 till now, I've been either building products myself or helping others build products. And I spent most of my career in the US from 98 to 2014. And from 2014
wow,
on,
that's
the last
time.
Yeah, it is. And the last 10 years I've spent in India. Across this, I had a chance to work on, very early stage products, so companies which started from zero and then built all the way to hundreds of millions of dollars in revenue. I had a chance to work in very large companies like Oracle, which were already billions of dollars in revenue and looking to add more billions to that number. I've also had the chance to work with companies in India which were smaller and then seeking to grow, especially outside of India. And in a way, I realized that I enjoyed the process of building products and scaling them. So when I worked with a company in India for a couple of years, I thought that when I leave that, I will do some startups of my own, which I did. One succeeded, one did not. And then after that, I started what I do now, which is product management and strategy consulting. That's what ProdGen does. And we work with essentially three types of companies. We work with some very early stage companies, startups and venture funds to help companies and founders build products and then scale the business. We also work with some of the IT services companies to help them build products or accelerators so that they can understand the transition from services to product. And then we work with some of the larger product companies and GCCs, mostly to train people and on product thinking, product management, and help them kind of navigate the innovation programs. So that's in a nutshell what we do. And I really enjoy the process of building products. So when I started, it wasn't even called product management, but it is now.
Yeah. So before we dive into the session, just for the audiences, any questions that you have, anything that you want to ask, please post it in the chat window and we'll take it up as it comes. So Kaustubh, just to start with, of course, you've seen a time when product for any person was nothing different than a soap or maybe an electrical appliance. A product was not a terminology used in, especially in the IT or the software industry. From that point to this point where even in the IT industry, everything revolves around products. You've seen a very big shift in the literal definition itself. So what do you think today, is referred to by, when we say product management, and how do you see the changes coming through today?
Yeah, so I think that's a lot to cover in one question. But what I would say is that certainly, if you look at companies based out of India, which are growing and now growing very rapidly, I think the last 20, 30 years, perhaps the time I left India to go to the US, was really services growth, right? So, companies based out of India essentially build products for others, but made to order, right? Whatever the client wanted, they did. There was also a lot of work in maintenance, looking at legacy code, legacy systems, improving them, upgrading them. And certainly along the way, they started building more and more interesting products. But the basis of it was always, somebody else told what to build. and the focus was on delivering that solution, right? Now, in the last 10 years, that shifted, right? There were also, some of the same services companies, got more involved in the process of building the product. And there were a lot of companies from India, obviously Zoho, Freshworks being some of the big ones, UiPath, more recent, Dhruva, bunch of others who also started building products, right? So in a way, this transition has happened in part because, the need for having customized solutions has reduced, right? So it's not like customized solutions are gone, but your basic ERP, CRM is now a product, right? Which wasn't the case 25, 30 years ago, but it is now. And increasingly, systems are moving away from just being customized to being readily available. So in a way, that has shifted. And to answer your question on what that has meant for product management, product management as a role has become much more evolved, right? So when I started, it was actually called program management or technical program management. Then it became called technical product management and so on. So now it's a far more defined role. There are clear competencies, clear skills, clear objectives in many of the companies. And in a way, the role of product manager is to orchestrate, right? To orchestrate across functions, certainly engineering, certainly sales and marketing, as well as understanding what customers want, and then helping craft that into a solution, right? Which would be your product, right? And so obviously now, like you said, most of these products you can't touch and feel, they are operating on your devices. So there's no physical product. It's all digital in most cases. Though, of course, product management continues to be relevant for physical products, and a lot of products, especially robotics and Internet of Things, are at the intersection of software and hardware. But, if I had to put it in a couple of lines, I think it's become far more defined, far more involved, and a lot more skills are now packed into the role of a product manager. Whether you think of it as soft skills or hard skills, I think a lot more is expected of product managers now than perhaps 10 years ago or 20 years ago.
So just to
Yes,
take
Amit.
it forward,
Over to
take
you.
it forward this discussion as a product lifecycle stage, Kaustubh, is the new product initiatives, right? So what you suggest for someone who is building a product, and what is currently as a trend which is going on? Basically, it's a data-driven decisions making, or it's a intuition, right? Uh, because the data is common to everyone, and maybe given the same results to everyone in terms of, because the data collection points and then the data will throw the same analytics for everyone, right? Vis-a-vis intuition is something which is going against the trend for sometimes, right? So what is the right methodology to use while you start looking at that? Okay, I want to get into a product development stage now as a new product development.
Very good question. Data versus intuition. So I don't know what is the right mix per se, but I think both are required, right? And I would certainly not build any products based on gut feel alone. I think we are way past that. I also don't believe that you should go with your gut feel and then see what happens, right? That's the classic trap of build first and then try to sell. It almost never works. So I would certainly say data is important. And you're right that now a lot of data, in fact, there is a huge amount of data, right? And most of the time, any person in business or technology struggles with making sense of the data, right? And the same is true for anybody building product, be it the product manager or the executive driving that effort. The challenge is now, even though the data is available to everyone, the insights are not obvious, right? So what do you do with the data? How do you interpret it? That is still left to the humans, right? So while it's true that everybody has access to the same data, the way you understand it, the way you interpret it is actually, depends on your own individual approach and skill. That is one. And there is also a danger of relying on, second-hand data, right? Because there is so much available on the internet, so much available by asking any of the chat GPTs of the world, that a lot of times research or understanding of what is happening in the market is second-hand. Right? So nothing replaces actually going and talking to people or observing people in action. And I would say that can be the secret sauce, right? So even if everybody has access to the data, to the extent you are able to interpret the data and actually go out in the real world, knock on doors, talk to people, learn from what they are saying, that can add perhaps your secret sauce for how you build the products. So I would say it's a mix. Certainly you want to use the data. At the same time, you want to rely on, uncommon insights or your interpretation, and then of course, first-hand information which you gather. Hope that answers your question.
Yeah, and I'm coming to part two questions of the same, where we talk about data and intuition. Is basically the customer centricity approach, right? Now, on one side, there is people like Steve Jobs who says that they don't know what they want. I will tell them what they want. Vis-a-vis, you take a market feedback, and then based on those market feedback, as a feedback loop, you try to address the problem statement and then define your product to a certain. So how and what works in what segment?
Yeah, very, very good question. And I think, certainly Steve Jobs is quoted as saying, they don't know what they want. And perhaps a precursor to that is what Ford said, right? So you would have heard of the Ford Motor Company. So I think Henry Ford also said that, if I had asked people what they wanted, they would have asked for faster horses. Right?
Yes.
That was before cars and, the automation and the assembly line came in, which actually led to mass production, right? So what I would say is that such kind of generational shifts, right? People moving from use of horse carriage to automobiles, hasn't happened tens of times, right? It has happened in the last 100 years only once. Certainly, when generational shifts like that occur, people don't know, right? But most of us will not be working on it. Hopefully we can get lucky to work on such generational shifts. But those kinds of shifts are rare, right? And they happen, maybe every 20 years, 50 years, or 100 years. So most of the products that we are working on are not like that. They are about innovation, but it's incremental. It's about building a better widget, building a better box, building something better. They do replace old technologies, and we've seen that all the time. But those kinds of generational shifts are rare, right? So while people like to quote Steve Jobs, it's not that he was ignoring what people were saying, but he was perhaps addressing the hidden needs, right? So one of the things, since you brought up, let's say, the iPod or the iPhone example, right? So the innovation in the iPod, which is access to music, right? Thousands of songs on one small device, was not something actually that Apple invented, right? There were MP3 players before that, which actually did the same thing. Perhaps the bigger invention was the creation of the iTunes, where a song was available for 99 cents or $1. Prior to that, you had to buy a CD which cost $20, right? And the CD had 16 songs, and you wanted to listen only to 2 songs, and the 14 songs you were forced to buy. So that was a pain or a problem that not the iPhone but the iTunes addressed. And if you think of the smartphones, there was a smartphone even before the iPhone, the BlackBerry, right, which helped people do emails. So being able to type and send emails was revolutionary. And BlackBerry or RIM, the company, actually reached very high, but they didn't necessarily anticipate the need of the fact that smartphones would be there with touch screens. And the smartphone actually it replaced multiple devices, right? So now few people are still wearing watches for style, but most people do not have an alarm clock. Most people do not have a separate radio. Most people are not carrying a camera and a phone, right? So those kinds of shifts are rare. They do happen, but I would sort of take that notion that customers don't know what they want with a pinch or more of salt. And perhaps attribute it to cases where there is a big shift, but be able to distinguish between big shifts and smaller shifts, which are happening all the time, right? Where we are looking to build something bigger, better, faster, cheaper. And those definitely require you to listen to the customers. And, sometimes we hear what customers are saying, right? So, which is, they say like, hey, I don't like this, or I like this, or I want this, which is part of the story. In product management, there is the concept of, hidden and unmet needs, right? So the customer may not always be in a position to articulate what their problem is, but that is essentially the skill of people building product to see if they can gauge or understand and listen, right? So listening is not only about hearing the words, but also about observing or listening or, hearing things which are not said based on observation. And, there again, your intuition comes in. As to what people are looking for, right? So if we can now say that, hey, would you, instead of carrying 5 devices, would you like to carry 1 device? Most people would say yes, because that was the situation once, right? So I remember in the early 2000s, I had a pager, right? So you could get beeps, so you could call back. I had a cell phone. I had a PDA on which my calendar was there and I could take electronic notes. And then obviously I had the laptop, right? So 3 or 4 devices were required just to do business. And now, of course, most of us are stuck to 2, right? One is the mobile phone, which is doing all those things. We don't carry cameras anymore. We don't need to carry a separate calculator. We don't need to have a radio or a music device with us. So, I would say certainly there is a shift, but I haven't seen many of those, at least in my lifespan. So I would take that notion with a sort of different interpretation. But very good question. I really appreciate it.
Shweta, over to you. Yes.
So talking about, first of all, talking about pagers, even though we are now in the world of virtual communication, Nick Fury and Captain Marvel still communicate on pagers. But yes, as you
I think
point
they operate
out,
across different worlds, right?
across
so
the world, yeah,
haven't
pager
made it.
still works there. So as you mentioned, there is a clear drift between building a tool, building simply a product or a software versus addressing a problem for the customer versus adding a value add. Okay, so it's either of the three that gives rise to building a product. So what do you see these days? What is the major focus put across on out of these three things?
Yeah. No, very, very interesting question. And, I'll start with your soap example, right? So, or a consumer goods kind of thing,
Yeah.
Soap, shampoo, toothpaste, brush, right? So, we're obviously all buying those products, but we're not buying the brush for brushing. We're buying the brush to clean our teeth, right? We're buying the soap to clean our hands or body. We're buying the detergent to clean our clothes, right? So, the customer is interested in the product only for its benefit. Right. So I don't particularly care what the product is. And over time, some of these products, and you see a lot of that in consumer goods, they get commoditized, right? Is there really a difference between paste A versus paste B? Obviously the paste companies would like you to think that, right? So there's all kinds of packaging, branding, different celebrities advertising that. But essentially one paste is really no different from the other. It's now your impression of it, right? Now, that has happened definitely with consumer goods. With technology, it's not quite the same, right? So I think some portions of technology are commoditized, which means, whatever product I can build, you can also build, and anybody else can. And this is increasingly happening, right? But people don't want the product, they want the benefits, right? So if we start with that understanding that, in a way, the job of people creating products is to deliver the benefits, then you already have a different perspective. Right. So I'm not delivering the product, but I'm delivering the benefit. In a way, when you saw that shift from, software, which people had to license, download, install on their machine, to software as a service, you saw part of the shift, right? Nobody cares whether the software is installed on my machine, as long as I get access to it. In fact, I don't want to pay for it upfront. I want to pay as I go, right? So I have the subscription model. Now, what can be anticipated perhaps beyond that is people don't want to pay for things they don't want to use or they don't use, right? So in fact, Netflix started that, where they said, okay, if you didn't watch any content on our platform this month, we will not charge you, right? So obviously that's, not everybody is doing that. Most product managers wouldn't want to refund money to customers if they didn't use the product. But, increasingly the emphasis is on, delivering the value. And in some cases, even delivering the outcome, right? So that's akin to saying, if Netflix asked you, were you happy? Were you entertained this month? Only then we will charge you. If you're not entertained, we will not charge you, right? So, it's not so obvious or clear whether that will happen, but you are seeing that happen in certain kinds of tools and platforms, right? Where the customer wants to pay for value, which means, so for instance, I think, like we were discussing earlier, right? E-commerce platforms. So e-commerce platforms earlier would be typically licensed based on number of servers, capacity, things like that. And that kind of licensing or charging model is gone. And now they are charging based on revenue, based on transactions, right? So you have X dollars of transactions, we are taking 2% cut of that. You are seeing the same with some of the financial systems which are delivering, receivables management, payables management. We help you collect so much, we help you manage so much, we will charge you on the basis of that. So I think perhaps some of it will happen, which is the shift to delivering value and pricing or charging based on value or outcome. It's unlikely to be something which is, just kind of plain sweeps, right? Just like you see today, that even though software as a service is the dominant mode, licensed software is not gone. Legacy systems are not gone. People building customized solutions are not gone. Neither has e-commerce completely replaced physical retail, right? So I would say that this is a shift which is happening. What percentage it takes away of the total, anybody can guess, and obviously some people will project that it's all over, but it's not. I think it will be a trend, it will be a shift. That's what I would say. Perhaps similar to how e-commerce has over time taken a bigger chunk and is growing faster than physical retail, but physical retail is definitely not gone, and in fact it's trying to reinvent itself. Yeah.
So definitely, I mean, it eventually boils down to addressing the customer's need rather than just giving a ready-to-use product, and not even wondering that whether it is relevant to the customer. And of course, not to forget the business angle.
Of course.
But coming to handling such a wide nuance of the product management or product development, it becomes difficult for a product manager to actually soak in these things, because product management as such has never been a textbook topic till date. It has not been taught in a methodical manner, how it has to be delivered. And today, I think the core problem that any product manager would be facing is managing multiple verticals that work along with. So for a business team, it would be the money that it's bringing on the table for the customer. For the sales team, it would be the, how I'm going to pitch it to the customer. Just tell me that. What am I supposed to sell? For the tech, it would just be a user story. How important or what role does the product manager play here? What is the important skill set that he needs in this kind of scenario where he can sell his story to all these people?
Wow, that's a long question.
Yes.
Lot of answers to that. So I'll start with the first one. You mentioned that product management is not textbook taught. Obviously that is true. And I think we ourselves try to teach people product management, but it has to be experiential learning, right? Which is it's a fancy way to say that you have to do it to learn it, right? You can't just read in a book or a textbook
it's
or
more like a do-it-yourself thing.
Correct. So you have to actually experience
it. Organization has its different method. Yeah.
You have to go through the process. Of course, there are frameworks, right, which enable your process of learning, and those are useful to learn. So I think certainly, and over time, that structure and process has evolved, right? So there is a way to learn product management, but a lot of it is understand frameworks or approaches, and then sort of bring your real world experience and learning to that, and that's a good way to learn product management. But I'll expand on the second question which you asked, which what does a product manager do, right? What all do you need to learn? What all do you need to see, understand before you can essentially build a successful product, right? So one is you have to understand that in the end you are trying to deliver value. You're delivering value. If you don't deliver value to your buyers and customers, you don't have a product, you don't have a business, right? Now, in order for this to succeed and work well, this is a team effort, right? So while the product manager's role may be to orchestrate it, you are working with multiple internal and external communities or stakeholders, right? So certainly part of that is business and sales, right? So you need to understand that your product needs to help make money, right? It needs to sell, bring in the money. And the sales and the business people, executives, would be under pressure to deliver that, right? That means you need to be able to, in a way, understand their language, their priorities, right? Then, of course, you need to work with engineering or people who are developing the product, right? And they may have their own perspective on what is important, what is challenging, what will take time, what will take effort. So you need to be able to understand that constituency and to some extent be able to speak their language, right? So we're already talking the language of business and sales. We certainly want to be able to talk the language of engineering. And certainly, nobody would know about your product if you didn't have marketing. So you need to understand what is it that they are looking for. How can they position? How can they talk to the world about your product? And are you helping them achieve that? And then, of course, you also, most importantly, you need to understand what customers are looking for, right? I think even earlier we talked about the idea that customers are looking for the business value or benefits or outcome. So you need to be able to understand that. And I think one thing which not everyone looks at is to be able to understand the place of your product in the customer's own business or life, right? So where does your product fit in, right? So for instance, we talked about the toothpaste, that typically fits into people's lives twice a day, morning and night, right? Now, that same understanding applies to your products. Some of the technology products may be used by some users and customers throughout the day. Some may be used once in a day, some may be used once in a week or once in a month, but may have different sort of levels of use and engagement and value attached to it, right? So being able to understand where your product fits into the customer's life and their business is also important. So one way to look at it, I like to think of the product manager as being multilingual, right? Where the product manager needs to be able to speak all these languages, the language of the customer, the language of marketing, the language of engineering, and the language of sales and business. And, again, you don't need to be fluent, each of those roles will be fluent at what they do, but you need to understand so that you can communicate with them. If you are able to achieve that, I think then, you have a high chance of succeeding. I know that because when I started, I could only speak engineering, and over time, I learned to speak a bunch of other languages. So I can attest to that myself. Yeah.
That I think becomes a challenge with many people, stepping into the shoes of the other person and trying to make him understand what's the value in it for him. Does the storytelling, these days it's much talked about subject. Everything has to be a story that sells. So how does storytelling come into this? How is it useful? Whether it is actually useful in collaborating with internal and external customers?
Yeah, no, very good question. I really like that question. So one is obviously, what people talk about as storytelling. There's the storytelling of business. Then some people say it's like you have to tell the story of your product. You have to tell, where it started. And of course, some parts of this are true. The way I like to look at storytelling is, what can I say to whoever I'm talking with, which will get them interested, which first I will get their attention. Second, I will actually be able to make some kind of an impact, right? Where they retain what I have to say. And that is absolutely important. I think whether you call it storytelling or selling your idea or selling your product, I think it's absolutely important. One of the advantages of storytelling or a storytelling approach is, all of us growing up would have heard a lot of stories, right? So, I mean, I fondly remember my memories of hearing stories from my grandparents, and those stories have stuck with me, even after all these years, because, the story is not just the set of words that it communicates, but it leaves you with some kind of a lesson or emotion. And that is what people remember, right? They don't necessarily remember the words, but they remember, I think Maya Angelou, one of the famous authors, she said, people will not remember what you say to them, but they will always remember how you made them feel. So that is perhaps the power of storytelling, where you can make people feel something. I certainly cannot make anyone feel anything by narrating a list of features. But if I can find a way to communicate to them, where my product could intersect with their lives and, it could influence their lives and maybe, do something better for their life or business, then perhaps they can remember. So if I think of that as storytelling, then yes, I agree. I don't necessarily agree with the idea of storytelling as, making up something, which is also part of storytelling. But if storytelling is thought of as something which allows you to communicate something and help others remember something or make them feel something different or special, then yes, by all means, storytelling is important.
Absolutely true.
So, also taking forward is basically again one of the greatest debate in recent past is basically a product-led growth versus a sales-led growth, right? So it's basically everyone who develops a product initially feels that the product is going to take care of everything, and that's the hero of the story. And they grow to a certain level on the word of mouth or through references to a certain point. But of course, what I see in a lot of places, it stuck to a certain level of growth, and then definitely you need to bring the sales angle to it, which is like a investment to a greater angle, because sales is not an easy option. It's a first is an investment option to a level, right? And then a lot of things has to move from how you the product is to get to a certain level, because sales require a lot of standardization in a lot of strategies which you built it to from your proposal stage to your GTM strategy to a certain level, right? And so that is where at what stage and how this particular transition has to happen within the organization primarily, right? And even we saw the Apple also has no salespeople, even if it's a kind of kind of a product led growth to a certain extent, right? So what is that right strategy, and at what is right stage where the product led growth has to move into sales?
Very good question. Is it PLG versus SLG? Classic debate on a lot of product management groups, and definitely PLG was a major fad after the book came out, and people were blindly following PLG. What I would say is that certainly products need to be sold. Whether the product can sell itself is a big question mark. Yes, in some categories or some types of products where people already understand what the product is, right? And you don't need to go out and educate customers. PLG can work. I rarely see that working alone without the help of sales and marketing in larger products where actually the process of try before you buy is not simple or impossible, right? So think of a system which manages your accounts and finance. Nobody is going to, no accountant, no person in payables, receivables, or the CFO is going to download and try your product and then vouch for it and spread it, right? So this is a system which each company has only one of, right? It would be chaos if they had 10 accounting systems. So there would be only one. So I think first thing I would say is you need to understand, where does your product stand, right? Is it something that people can try before they buy? Does it even make sense to do that? What is the kind of homework, access in terms of data, technology savviness that is needed before somebody can even experience your product? If you understand that, then that will allow you to choose whether some element of your growth strategy is product led and some is sales led. I think even if you have a product led growth strategy for something which people can try before they buy, experience, walk into a store, see, download and see, see on one of the review sites, there will always be the element of sales. And certainly where there are multiple people involved in the decision making, right? Especially, and that is true for enterprise or mid-market customers and large-scale systems, which are, it's not a one-person decision. The decision is always by a set of buyers or a set of, or a committee of sorts, in which you need someone to go out and consult and educate and convince multiple people, which is something you are rarely able to do with a product page and a download and an install, right? So while, of course, we are speaking generalities here, there could be exceptions, but by and large, when the sales process is more complex, there are multiple buyers involved in the cycle, and it's not like a, small decision, right? To replace an accounting system or to replace a supply chain system, I think it's a transformation of sorts. Those are rarely going to be product led, if at all. And in most cases are going to be sales led, because there are multiple parties involved, multiple budgets involved, multiple people need to be convinced. So I would say, PLG is unlikely to replace, sales led growth, especially in those segments. So mostly I think it's like, one of those debates where somebody can argue endlessly from their own point of view and another person can from their own point of view.
Yeah.
Somewhere the reality seems to lie somewhere in the middle and is specific to the product or situation. Yes, Shweta, go ahead, please.
So I think we are nearing the second half of this session. So while we continue our discussion, I'll also take a look at the questions. And of course, one topic that we cannot miss, when we talk about current trends in product development, is the presence of AI and ML today. It's talked about everywhere. Every product wants to have AI supported services or functionalities and features. But how, as a product manager, or how do you actually decide? Not every product would rather require AI. So how do you go about using an AI, backed system or algorithm for your product?
I think a very good question. I'm sure Amit has some of his own thoughts, but for a while it seemed like you must have
thoughts also.
You must have AI in your product in order to be able to sell, right? There was a question being asked by customers. There was the question being asked by investors. Everybody wanted it, right? It was as if it was like this, magic dust, right? Like if it's not on your product or in your product, then nobody wants your product, right? Now, of course, part of it is hype. Because people, especially people in technology, want to talk about AI endlessly, want to talk about AI taking over the world and all of that. But if we leave that aside for a moment, it's another technology, and definitely it's it's perhaps one of the technologies which may achieve a major shift in what people can do or cannot do. So it's not to be taken lightly. That being said, at the end of the day, it goes back to whether addition of A, B, C, and AI, does that actually solve a customer problem, right? If it doesn't solve a customer problem, then it adds no value, right? And we've seen that in the last 10, 15 years with blockchain, it's obviously has its place, but it's not caused a generational shift. Same thing with big data, right? It has its place, but it has not necessarily changed everything. Maybe the change will trickle. Perhaps something similar could happen with AI, where at the end of the day, whether AI or blockchain or any of the technologies need to solve a customer problem and need to solve a customer problem better than it was being solved before. Otherwise, there's no place for adoption, right? The second challenge with technologies or, deciding whether to add AI into your product is the question of whether you have data, right? So AI is like data hungry. So AI does not work, and same thing with machine learning. It's essentially the process of actually going through a lot of data, understanding the patterns, and then being able to predict it, right? So if you have nothing to feed, or the same old ego, right? Garbage in, garbage out. If you don't have good data or not enough data to feed it, then you won't get good answers or good predictions, right? So that challenge lies. So a lot of times when people are looking at, the sort of evaluating, like you said, Shweta, whether or not AI should be part of their product, I think two questions are important. First is definitely, does it add value? Does it solve a problem which was not solved before, or does it actually solve a problem which could not be solved before, or it solves it 5 times, 10 times better, which is the same yardstick for any new product. Second is for you to be able to build an AI solution or even an ML solution. Is there actually access to good data and enough volume of data so that you could actually train it in order to be able to use and arrive at better predictions? So those two are always going to be important. The third thing, which is actually very interesting, from the role of a product manager, is actually you need to understand a little more of the tech, right? Because it's a new technology. Being able to understand what is the difference between AI, ML, what are the different approaches, how much data do you need, what kind of technologies do you need, what kind of storage do you need, what kind of training time do you need, what kind of model approaches you should take. So perhaps the literacy or the understanding of these models, approaches, is important. Otherwise, you could easily get caught in the jargon or the technology terms, get confused, not know what is what. So perhaps I would caution people on that. If you are somebody looking at that, then certainly you want to at least understand the basics of the technology. If you don't understand everything, talk to someone who is from the engineering background, learn a little bit of it, watch YouTube, look up Wikipedia, develop a level of literacy so you can have a sort of reasonable, intelligent conversation on it before deciding. But the basics haven't changed, I think, though there is a lot of promise in terms of what AI can and cannot do.
AI, sorry, Amit, yes, please go on.
Yeah. So just because the genie is out of the bottle now, let me ask a question. so, so AI is basically, at Simple CRM also within our product, we have using extensively generative AI in terms of improving the sales performance as well as the sales coach, right? And definitely it solves to a problem. The thing is that while the technology is getting solved to a problem, it's differentiating between a customer wish list with respect to now everything is going to be done by AI. Vis-a-vis what is the possibilities of AI, right? Is still, I think, a lot of awareness has to be done. So how we should give that kind of that what AI can do to a certain extent within a product, right? And what should Max can expect, because it is not going to happen and on a single one day primarily, right? It's going to have a journey in terms of, because the training those particular engines to give answers is on their own, right? So maybe because it's getting interchangeably used as analytics, ML, AI, right? How basically has to answer that while someone says, okay, my product has AI, now this AI is going to do everything for me. Like that is what I call it's a genie coming out of the bottle now asking, Hukum Aka, what can I do for you? kind of a requirement, right? So how you constrain that kind of expectation which is happening through this particular technology?
I think that's a very excellent question or challenge, which is with any new technology, it's almost the perception is like it's the genie in the bottle, right? Like you can ask any question you want, and lo and behold, the answer is served. So expectations are at the level of magic. Right? So it can do anything. Some of that perhaps driven by Hollywood and Bollywood movies where AI can pretty much do everything. Same thing was true with robots for a while. And of course, the reality is far from it. Right? The reality is kind of challenging, gray, ugly, because we already talked about the challenges of not having the data. The second challenge is that essentially it's a prediction technology, right? It's not necessarily yet a thinking technology, which means unless it has seen and observed those patterns, it cannot predict patterns. Of course, You have the use of AI for creativity also, where people are coming up with new images or new documents or new text. Certainly there is a place for it, but all of it is a projection of what has been learned in the past. For the most part, when it's able to give good and reasonable answer, over time perhaps it improves. So managing customer expectations and keeping them at sort of realistic levels continues to be a challenge, right? So on the one hand, certainly salespeople want to sell, right? So you want people to acquire the product, but then the expectations are so hyped up with all kinds of news and new startups and new things happening, that I think it's a challenging time in challenging aspect of it, that you need to temper their expectations and give a dose of reality in terms of what can happen. And there I would kind of resort to the classic product management trick of road mapping, right? So to be able to say that yes, this is perhaps the future when we may be able to do those things, but this is the reality, this is what we can do now. While it doesn't necessarily solve your problem, it perhaps buys you a little more time in terms of
Right.
Okay.
Shweta, are there questions from community side also?
Yes, so quite some of them we have already covered. So one question that I thought I should ask you here is, can you discuss the trend of product managers embracing continuous delivery and DevOps practices?
Very
So
good
what
question.
things have changed in handling, CI/CD, CDCI and DevOps activities around the product?
Very interesting question, perhaps from somebody very tech savvy. So CI/CD stands for, just for the sake of our audience, continuous integration, continuous development, and now it's continuous deployment, right? So as you are building, you are actually integrating with other tools, and then you are deploying. My own experience with CI/CD is that I think you need a very evolved development and product organization before you can engage in CI/CD. Right. Same thing with kind of agile and trying to do weekly sprints, right? So you need to be very evolved as a company, as a product team, as a dev team, and as a process to be able to do things like that. But yes, if you have reached that level of evolution and sort of smooth operating, and everybody knows what they want to do, then I think you can consider it. But more from a product and a business point, I would evaluate whether customers want it. Right. In certain cases, there is value in actually continuously delivering new features, capabilities seamlessly. In other cases, people actually don't want the change. They don't want the disruption. Right. So whether or not, so while CI/CD as a development practice or a deployment practice is a good thing, because it speaks to kind of not having to make anyone wait. The question you should also ask yourself is actually, are you able to deliver value like that? And is that what your customers want? So we've seen that, in some of our clients who deliver enterprise solutions, while the tech team may be ready for CI/CD, the customers are not, because they want, 2 months of UAT before they deploy new capabilities. On the other hand, in case of B2C, where, small features and capabilities are trickling in, almost unnoticed, I think, deploying, if not every week, every 2 weeks is okay. But in case of a large scale deployment where you may have to actually undergo a longer process of data validation or functionality testing and validation, you may not need CI/CD in terms of deploying to customers. Perhaps for internal deployment, you could still use it. So I would say in a nutshell, the answer is more nuanced based on your circumstances, maturity of your product and development process. And then the last but most important thing is the need of your customers and whether they are ready for it.
Well, the discussion, Kaustubh, with you can go on. I think we've just started, but we are short of time. And I'm sure we would definitely need another session to, continue to discuss these trends. But if I summarize whatever we have discussed today, what I would say is that product management as a whole has evolved a lot from over the past years what it used to be. There are too many new things happening, and they're happening very rapidly. And it need not be that each and every new trend or each and every new thing is applicable to your product. So the whole crux probably lies in identifying your need and getting out of that feeling of being left out, and you just need to embrace it. No, you have to sit back and take a quick check whether the new trends apply to you or not, and how they're going to solve the problems of your day-to-day activities or your customers. Right. Having said that, this again becomes a very difficult, challenging thing for a product manager, apart from all the other things that it has to do. So what suggestions, what advice would you like to give them in terms of staying adept with the latest trends and emerging things. At the same time, understanding how to implement them wherever necessary.
I really appreciated your summary of it. So thank you
So
for that.
this is one question which has been asked in one form or the other from many members here. So I thought I'll just summarize all of them and push it to you.
Yeah. No, I think it's very interesting. And, in a way, I see this challenge not just for product managers, but for all of us working in technology, where there are continuously new technologies appearing. And, it takes a while to know whether that new trend or technology is here to stay or it's just going to be gone.
Yeah.
So there's a lot to keep up with. So one of the things that maybe a couple of things that have helped me. One is to stay curious, right? So always try to learn a little bit, try to understand, it's not always easy to keep up with, but you don't have to learn everything yourself, right? So one of the things I try to do is, if I don't know or don't understand anything, I try to find people who know much more than and go ask them, request them to explain. That's a trick that I've been using for the last 25 years. And it has worked very well for me. So there's no need to feel the pressure that I have to learn everything on my own, because it's impossible to learn everything on your own, right? That is one. Second is always keeping in mind that the basics of why people buy product. People haven't changed. Technology may have changed, but people haven't changed that much. Obviously we are all now have shorter attention spans, but outside of that, in terms of what people want, right? Everybody wants to be happy. Everybody wants to make more money. Everybody wants to spend less time commuting, spend more time doing fun things. That hasn't changed, right? So people patterns, buying patterns, why people buy products, those aspects haven't materially changed, right? So that, I think, speaks to your delivering value, your ability to sell, market, sell your story or do storytelling, that hasn't materially changed. So there will be some skills, especially your soft skills, in terms of being able to communicate, being able to collaborate, being able to convince, those have not changed, right? So I would say, if you want to remain relevant, independent of what new technologies are coming, focus on the soft skills, right? And this is an advice I would definitely give my younger self if I could, is to focus on the soft skills. Hard skills, technology knowledge, domain knowledge will come and go, and there will never be enough of it. There will be always more. And there your shortcut is go find experts to talk to, request them, and you will learn a lot more faster, or at least you will understand the few pieces or nuggets which are relevant to you, instead of trying to understand everything. And most importantly, be okay with not knowing things, right? No one person can know everything. So when you are stuck with something which you don't know or don't understand, go ask somebody else for help. Maybe they can help you understand. So I would say those 2-3 things have worked well for me. Yeah.
That's be open to accept that you don't know and unlearn what you have learned in order to absorb new things.
Yeah. I think the unlearning part is tough to do, certainly.
Oh, it is. Definitely.
And many a times that's something most people have a challenge with. I know that sometimes I have struggled with that, right? Sometimes you think that every new thing is hype, because you've seen that before or something similar. So sometimes being able to distinguish hype versus reality, and whether actually a real change is happening, can be challenging. And that's why I think you have to not only stay curious, but perhaps stay humble, right? Like, avoid thinking that you are the expert or you know everything.
Yes.
That's a trap any of us can fall into. And as long as you are always willing to learn and be open, and be willing to learn from anything. You don't have to learn from experts. You can learn from somebody younger, somebody with less experience, somebody who's actually building something new, because that is an opportunity as well, right? So I think if you can bring that kind of attitude to work or whatever you do, I think you will remain relevant, because you will keep learning.
That's absolutely true. I think that is the crux of handling anything around you. And without that, you cannot, no matter how much you go in depth of technology, when it comes to implementing, these are the soft skills that are required for a proper implementation.
Yeah, and I think that is something that doesn't get talked about enough, right? So even though there are frameworks for learning different aspects of product management, road mapping, product strategy, positioning, pricing, all of that, a lot of frameworks, a lot of good material. All the material for learning soft skills is actually out in the real world, right? So obviously there are books and approaches, but most of it you will learn by practice. So, so let's say, earlier on I used to read a lot of books on negotiation and communication and persuasion. And I realized that, even if I read 10 books, that was useless until I actually went out and tried it. And trying it out
One
even 2 times.
syllabus question the other person asked.
Yeah.
And
So it's the same, like where now a lot of people think that, hey, I watched this YouTube video or I read this blog of ABC expert and now I know this. And nothing can be farther from the truth. Until you've experienced it, you realize the challenges, you understand the nuances through practice. You haven't learned. So I would say go out and do that more. Yeah.
We definitely need to keep experimenting.
Yes, indeed. Amit, any words from you? I know both of us are back in the conversation track.
Yeah. So
Amit
I think
is
Shweta has
smiling.
already said is basically covering all product management trends within one session is going to be difficult. We will have to have definitely Bahubali part 2, like product management trends in part 2, right? Because we haven't touched on India context versus global context to a certain extent, because what we are still seeing, we haven't scratched the surface of product management within India to a certain extent. The mindset still has to change a lot from a product management perspective. The young generation looking at making career in the product management has to do a lot of journey. They are not aware in terms of what could be the growth career path for them, right? Sometimes a couple of years back, due to proliferation of startups to a greater extent, we saw some kind of jump happening into product management space. But again, the moment of funding winter has come, we have seen again those roles rolling back to a certain level, right? Because finally it's all to develop a product is an investment first. That's a very different approach than what India has been trained for, the services approach, where until I see the money, I'm not going to put the efforts to a greater extent, right? So that is how we have been built. It's not neither good or bad, because everything has pros and cons to a certain extent, and the solution lies somewhere in the middle of that particular stuff, right? The ethics in product management, basically, as the topic which we haven't spoken, is that whether how inclusive that product adoption has to be there to a greater extent, and how to build a partner ecosystem around it, how to make convert into from a one application to a platform orientation, right? So then it's like continuous learning how to happen with CI/CD, which spoke to a certain level. But in terms of how to approach agile approach within a developed product to a certain extent, right? Because while doing implementation, still customer would like to have standard product going through that agile approach, which has become very difficult, because your product has to do certain standard functionality. That is that you bought a product, but customer want to make them so customized that the standard product lives there, right? And then you have to like having a different instances for different customers to a greater extent, and then managing those version management with respect to different customers becomes a very challenging. And then you lose that entire standardization of a product to a greater extent. Too much standardization again creates a problem, because then you are not addressing the customer problem statement. You are asking him to change what is his unique processes for his businesses, which you have developed over the period of time, to accustom to what product offers to a greater extent, right? So it's between somewhere a standard product vis-a-vis some kind of a customization offer, how that journey has to happen while doing an implementation also, right? What kind of approach has to be done so that the journey happens to a greater extent, right? So I think these are the lot of I think open areas. I think we should have second session covering this, basically the lot of product management trends, because by all means and said, the ROI or the ROC basically is always higher on a product than services, right? It gives you longevity, it gives you predictions to a certain extent, it gives you excellence to a certain level in terms of creating a center of excellence, right? And it is basically a one-time effort and then replicating that particular efforts on a multiple clients, right? So that has to get approached primarily, but that is still a journey which I think a lot of companies are going through, because the kind of optimization which needs to happen is still not happening to a greater extent. The concept initially which they started developing a product is still not there, because every time, as I said, is that they have to keep accustomed to customer requirement, and specifically India market is a very different case in altogether, right? So why it cannot be like China or USA, there is no answer, because India is India. it's unique. in most of circumstances, it's unique, because we have multiple language, multiple traditions, multiple mindsets, and multiple upbringing levels to understand that, right? So, and that is where the flexibility which we have as a culture, people also expect in a product to have that flexibility to to a level, right? So Saishnuta has to be there within the product also, right? So 100% productization is maybe not the right case in India, but somewhere reaching to that level is what Indian product companies will always strive for, and I think that's where the discussion we'll have to have second session on that. If any questions are or your views on that,
I don't know. I think that there was a lot of different points. I think certainly the services to product and product mindset is something I'd love to discuss. I think we've had that experience in terms of trying to teach people of services background, product mindset. We've also worked with clients who have, navigated the services to product, if not transition, at least half a transition in some aspects. So I have a lot of practical stories and experiences to share, good ones and bad ones as well. But I agree that it's a journey, it's a process, and definitely the other part you touched upon, which is a much longer topic, is the maturity of India as a technology buying market, right? So that is also what many companies are up against. Which is, I think, a topic of its own. So one is the services to product mindset, and then whether to sell in India or not, on what it means to sell in India. I see those as two distinct topics. Ethics obviously being another one which you touched on. I think that's a lot of different topics which definitely require more time to discuss. It doesn't look like we have that much time, but I really appreciate questions from both of you. I really appreciate the way you summarized it, Shweta. So thank you for having me. I really enjoyed this conversation.
This is volume 1 and have such sessions.
Sure.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for this wonderful session. Have a good day.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.
Thank you.